John and Laura Thompson had built the perfect life until their 7-year-old daughter Lily uncovered a chilling secret that would shatter everything they thought they knew about their family. At first glance, the Thompson family seemed to have it all. John and Laura, both in their early 30s, were the picture of a perfect couple. They lived in a quiet, well-kept home on the edge of a small suburban neighborhood, a place where children played freely and everyone knew each other. The Thompsons were a friendly, approachable family. John worked as a software engineer, a well-paying job that allowed him to provide comfortably for his family, while Laura, a stay-at-home mum, dedicated herself to raising their only daughter, Lily. Their life seemed balanced, content, and fulfilling. The couple's interactions with their neighbors were warm and welcoming. John could often be seen mowing the lawn or helping neighbors with various tasks, while Laura hosted neighborhood barbecues and school bake sales. They appeared to be the type of family everyone admired: devoted parents, happy children, and a peaceful home. They had a cute golden retriever who was frequently seen running around the yard, and the family often took evening walks together, enjoying the crisp air and the simple joy of being outside. It was the kind of life many people dreamed of, and their outward happiness made it seem like nothing could ever disrupt the harmony they had built. Their daughter Lily was a bright and cheerful 7-year-old. She had a lively spirit and an imagination that seemed to have no bounds. She loved school, adored her teachers, and was popular with the other children. Her laugh was infectious, and she was often seen playing with her friends in the neighborhood or helping her mother around the house. John and Laura were proud of their daughter, always speaking highly of her to their friends and family. Lily was their pride and joy, the perfect blend of sweetness and curiosity. Yet over time, small changes began to occur that went unnoticed by most people around them. Lily, once always laughing and excited, started to show signs of being more withdrawn. At first it wasn't alarming. Children often have moods or phases, right? She began to retreat into herself after school, choosing to spend more time in her room, playing quietly with her toys or reading. Her enthusiasm for outdoor activities waned. She wasn't as quick to rush out to play with her friends, and she sometimes became unusually upset over small things, such as a toy being misplaced or a minor argument with a friend. Her behavior seemed off, but nothing drastic enough to raise immediate concern. Laura, while noticing these changes, dismissed them as part of the growing pains of childhood. It wasn't unusual for children to go through phases of shyness or moodiness. She assured herself that Lily was just adjusting to school and the social dynamics that came with it. She never thought twice about it, even when Lily's behavior began to grow more concerning, more withdrawn, more anxious. Lily had started to talk less at the dinner table, and when she did, it was often in a soft, reluctant voice. John, on the other hand, remained somewhat detached from these subtle shifts. He was focused on his work and his own routine, rarely noticing the small signs of distress that his daughter exhibited. His connection with Lily was loving but distant, often playing the role of the provider and protector, but never quite fully attuned to her emotional needs. It was easy to overlook the warning signs until they became too loud to ignore. The family appeared to be in perfect harmony, but a closer look would reveal that the perfect image was nothing more than a mask, hiding something far darker just beneath the surface. Something that Lily knew, something that she couldn't yet fully understand, but something that would soon change everything. The shadows were already beginning to stretch across their seemingly idyllic life. and no one saw it coming. One evening, after dinner, the atmosphere in the Thompson household seemed unusually tense. It was a quiet Tuesday, the kind of evening when families unwind from their busy days, perhaps watching TV or engaging in small talk. But tonight, there was a palpable unease in the air. Lily, typically full of energy after school, was unusually subdued. She had barely touched her food and instead picked at it absent-mindedly, her gaze often drifting toward the window. Laura noticed it first, but didn't comment, assuming Lily was simply tired after a long day at school. After all, it wasn't uncommon for children to lose interest in dinner, especially when their minds were preoccupied with other things. But as the evening wore on, Lily's behavior grew even more concerning. Instead of running outside to play with the neighborhood kids, she went to her room early, curling up on her bed with her stuffed bear. Laura, ever the nurturing mother, went to check on her, hoping to comfort her daughter with a bedtime story or a cuddle. When she entered the room, Lily was lying in the dark, her small form huddled beneath the covers. There was something in her eyes, something far older than her 7 years, a kind of unease that made Laura's heart flutter with worry. At first, Lily didn't respond to Laura's gentle calls, but when she did speak, her words were cryptic. "Mommy, I don't like it down there." Laura's brows furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean, sweetie? What's wrong?" Lily sat up and clutched her bear tightly, her knuckles turning white. The door in the basement. It's scary. Daddy said I shouldn't go near it." Laura's pulse quickened. She had never thought twice about the locked door in the basement. John had always told her it was just for storage, a place to keep things out of the way, but hearing Lily's words sent a chill down her spine. What could possibly be so frightening about a door? Was Lily's imagination running wild, or was something more troubling going on? Still, Laura dismissed it for the moment. It was likely just a childish fear, something easily soothed with a reassuring hug. She sat beside her daughter, rubbed her back, and reassured her that everything would be fine. But as she did, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was more to Lily's words than just a typical childhood fear. The following day, Lily's behavior grew even more odd. She refused to go near the basement door, and when they passed it on their way through the house, she clung tightly to Laura's side, her eyes fixed on the door as though it were something to be feared. When Laura asked her again what was wrong, Lily simply shook her head, her eyes wide with terror, but she refused to say anything more. Laura tried to engage her in conversation, but each time the basement came up, Lily would fall silent, as if afraid of speaking further. John, ever the practical one, didn't seem concerned. When Laura mentioned Lily's fears, he shrugged it off as an overactive imagination. "She's probably just scared of the dark," he said dismissively. "I'll talk to her when I get a chance." But Laura could tell that John wasn't taking it seriously. To him, it seemed like a phase. But to Laura, the more she thought about it, the more something felt off. She tried to keep the situation under control, thinking that it would pass as soon as Lily felt safe again, but the unease lingered. The warning signs were mounting. Her daughter's refusal to go near the basement, the way she would flinch whenever the topic came up, the secretive way she would glance toward the door as though something was waiting behind it. The seed of doubt was planted, and no matter how much she tried to convince herself it was just a phase, Laura could feel that something much darker was at play. Late that night, when the house was quiet and everyone was asleep, Laura lay awake, in bed staring at the ceiling. She couldn't shake the feeling that Lily knew something she wasn't saying. Her daughter had always been perceptive, and the fear she had displayed was unlike any typical childhood worry. It was real, raw, and filled with an ominous weight, and as Laura lay there in the dark, she made a decision. The next morning she would go to the basement herself. She had to find out what Lily was so afraid of, and what John wasn't telling her. The next morning, as John prepared for work and Lily was still asleep, Laura found herself standing at the top of the basement stairs. The door to the basement was shut, as it always was, but today it felt different. There was an unease in the air, a heavy, unshakable feeling that something was wrong. Her heart was racing, but she forced herself to take the first step toward the basement. She told herself it was just her imagination running wild. There was nothing to be afraid of, right? But as she descended the stairs, her unease grew, and she could feel a growing sense of dread gnawing at her gut. Laura hadn't given it much thought before, but now, standing in front of it, she couldn't ignore the creeping feeling of discomfort. It was a simple door, wooden and unremarkable, but the lock on it seemed out of place. John had always insisted it was just for storage, that there was nothing to worry about. But the secrecy around it, the fact that it was always kept locked, only made it feel more sinister. Taking a deep breath, Laura walked toward the door, her hand trembling as she reached for the cold metal handle. She had never tried to open it before, but today, something inside her pushed her forward. Maybe Lily's fears weren't as unfounded as she had initially thought. She glanced over her shoulder, making sure no one was around, and then turned the key she found hanging by the door. The lock clicked open with a sharp, unsettling sound. The door creaked as it opened, revealing a narrow, dimly lit room beyond. The walls were lined with shelves filled with what seemed to be random objects, old furniture, tools, and large black garbage bags stacked in the corners. But it was the center of the room that made her stop dead in her tracks. There, in the middle of the floor, was a large wooden chest, its surface worn and scratched, as though it had been moved many times. A chill ran through Laura as she stared at it, her breath catching in her throat. There was something about it that felt wrong. She slowly approached the chest, her footsteps hesitant but determined. She reached out to open it, but then something stopped her. A small, nagging thought tugged at the back of her mind. What if she wasn't supposed to see what was inside? What if there was something there that would change everything? But her curiosity got the better of her. With shaking hands, she lifted the heavy lid. What she saw inside made her heart skip a beat. It wasn't just old clothes or forgotten tools, as she had expected. Instead, the chest contained dozens of photographs of young girls who were no older than Lily. Some of them were familiar faces from the neighborhood, while others appeared to be strangers. The photos were unsettling. Some showed the girls playing, others were more intimate, with expressions of fear or confusion. But it wasn't just the photographs that made Laura's stomach churn. Beneath the photos were small personal items, hair, ribbons, bracelets, and even drawings, things that couldn't possibly belong to their family. Laura felt her legs go weak, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. She couldn't make sense of it. Why would John have these? What did they mean? As her eyes scanned the chest, her heart pounded in her chest, and a cold sweat broke out across her skin. She had to know more. Suddenly, she heard a noise, a faint, scuffing sound behind her. Laura whipped around, her pulse racing. The door to the basement had creaked open, and standing there in the doorway was John. His face was pale, his expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of them moved. The tension in the air was thick, suffocating. Laura's hand instinctively moved to cover the chest, as though trying to protect the horrible truth she had uncovered. But it was too late. John had seen. He knew she knew. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. There was no longer any hiding. The secret was out, and the truth, horrifying and undeniable, was waiting to be revealed. John didn't say a word as he entered the room. His face was ashen, the kind of pale that only comes from shock or fear. His hands were trembling slightly, though he tried to hide it by stuffing them into the pockets of his jeans. For a long moment, the air between him and Laura was thick, with silence, both of them standing on opposite sides of the room, a chasm of disbelief separating them. Laura's gaze was fixed on the chest, still open, the photographs and personal items spilling out, the horrifying evidence laid bare. John seemed frozen in place, unable to tear his eyes away from the scene that had just shattered his perfect world. His chest rose and fell rapidly as he struggled to breathe, trying to gather himself, but it was clear that something inside him was crumbling. Laura's mind raced, her heart pounding in her ears. Every ounce of her being screamed at her to run, to escape this nightmare, but she couldn't move. She was rooted to the spot, her body trembling with the realization that everything she had ever known about her husband was a lie. The moments felt like hours as Laura slowly began to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "John, what is this? What are these pictures?" Her voice cracked with raw emotion, the weight of her words hitting her harder than anything she had ever imagined. John finally took a step forward, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and something darker, something that made Laura's stomach twist. He opened his mouth, but for a long time, no words came out. His face twisted with conflicting emotions, as though he was trying to decide whether to speak the truth or continue to hide it. I didn't mean for you to find out like this," he muttered, his voice hoarse. His eyes flickered briefly, toward the chest, then back to Laura, but he didn't dare meet her gaze for long. Laura's mind spun, but one thing was clear: he was guilty. There was no denying it now. "What does this mean, John?" Her voice was steadier now, but it was cold, distant. She couldn't bring herself to speak to him as she once had. The man standing before her was not the same person she had married. John swallowed hard, his eyes welling with emotion, but it was not the kind of sorrow she expected. It was something far darker, something far more unsettling. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said finally, his voice low. "But I've been keeping these things for years. These girls, they were victims of something I couldn't control. I thought I could stop, but I never did." The words hit Laura like a slap to the face. She wanted to run, to scream, to tear away from him and never look back. But she couldn't move. She was paralyzed with disbelief, her mind unable to fully comprehend what John was admitting. They were my obsession," he continued, his voice breaking. "I thought I could help them, make things better. But I only made it worse. I know it's wrong, I know. But I couldn't stop." He finally met her gaze, and in his eyes, Laura saw something that chilled her to her core, something far worse than guilt. It was a vacant kind of emptiness, a hollowness that suggested his actions were no longer driven by desire or compulsion. They were driven by something darker, something that consumed him from the inside out. Laura's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't process the words anymore. The man she had spent years with, the man she had trusted, was a monster. She had seen glimpses of his true nature in fleeting moments, but she had never allowed herself to believe it. Now, the full weight of it crushed her, and she felt as though the ground had fallen out from beneath her. "Why, John? Why?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you come to me?" He shook his head slowly, his face twisted with regret. "I didn't know how. I thought you'd leave me. I thought everything would fall apart if you found out, and I couldn't risk losing you." His voice was quiet, almost desperate, but there was no sincerity left in it. There was only a hollow, helpless plea for understanding that Laura could not give. As the enormity of the situation settled over her, Laura's mind began to race through all the moments she had dismissed, all the signs she had ignored. The locked basement door, the strange behavior from Lily, the way John had always been so guarded about certain things. It all started to make sense now, but the answers only left her more broken than before. John's actions had shattered not only the life they had built together, but the fragile trust that had once held their family together. And as he stood there, admitting his darkest secrets, Laura realized with a sinking heart that she would never look at him the same way again. The man she had married was gone, replaced by a stranger, and the world she had once known would never be the same. The days that followed John's confession were a blur of police investigations, reporters, and a never-ending stream of emotions. Laura barely slept, barely ate. She could not bring herself to look at John again, let alone speak to him. He was no longer the man she had loved, the father of her daughter. The man standing before her had shattered every illusion she had about their life. He had shattered her trust in the world around her. Lily was oblivious to the full extent of what had happened. Laura did her best to shield her from the details, but the tension in the house was palpable. Lily had always been sensitive to moods, and the heavy silence that filled every room was enough to make her retreat further into herself. She asked about John, of course, but Laura was careful with her words. She told her that Daddy was sick and needed help, but that he would be going away for a while. It was the truth, but it wasn't enough to ease the questions Lily kept asking. Why didn't Daddy come home? Where had he gone? Laura had no answers. How could she explain to her daughter that the man she had trusted, the man who had been her hero, was a predator who had hidden his dark secrets in plain sight? She could not find the words to make it make sense. The police were thorough in their investigation. They combed through every inch of the house, finding even more evidence of John's twisted actions. The chest in the basement, with its photographs, hair ribbons and other unsettling items, was just the beginning. As they dug deeper, they discovered a network of people connected to John's disturbing activities. It was clear that he had been living a double life for years, carefully hiding his darkest impulses behind the facade of a loving father and husband. Laura was forced to confront the reality of what John had done. As the police revealed more about his past, his interactions with other young girls, his obsession and his manipulation, she felt a mixture of horror and disbelief. The man she had married had been leading a secret life, one she could never have imagined. He had carefully constructed his image, weaving lies so deeply that even those closest to him never suspected anything. The shock was unbearable. It felt as though everything she had ever known had been turned upside down, and there was no way to set things right again. John's arrest was public, and the media swarmed the small town. The once quiet neighborhood was now the subject of endless speculation, gossip, and judgment. People whispered behind Laura's back, questioning how she hadn't seen the signs, how she had lived with such a monster in her home for so long. It was all too much for her to bear. She had spent years loving a man who had only ever deceived her. The world she had once known was crumbling, and there was no way to stop it. As for John, he was taken away in handcuffs, his face a mask of guilt and resignation. He never once looked back as he was escorted to the police car, his expression hollow and detached. It was as if he had finally accepted the consequences of his actions, but even now, Laura could not bring herself to feel any sympathy for him. He had robbed her of everything, the life she had imagined for herself, the future she had planned for Lily, and her trust in everything she thought was safe. In the weeks that followed, Laura sought counseling, trying to put the shattered pieces of her life back together. She focused all her energy on Lily, determined to shield her from the pain of the truth for as long as possible. But it was hard. Every day was a struggle to reclaim a sense of normalcy, to rebuild the life she had once known. But there was no denying that things would never be the same again. Lily began to open up more, though. She started asking questions, trying to understand why her father wasn't coming home. Laura did her best to answer in a way that was simple and clear, but not too detailed. She told her that Daddy had done some very bad things, and because of that, he couldn't be with them anymore. It was a heartbreaking conversation, and every word felt like a weight on Laura's chest. She could see the confusion in Lily's eyes, but also the sadness. Her little girl was growing up far too fast. John was convicted, his trial a public spectacle that left Laura feeling exposed and vulnerable. The court documents, the media coverage, the testimonies, it all felt like a never-ending nightmare. The once quiet, happy family had been torn apart by a single, horrifying truth. John's secret was no longer just a shadow. It was a reality they had to live with every day. But through it all, one thing remained clear. Lily had been the key to exposing the truth. If she hadn't spoken up, if she hadn't trusted her instincts, the horrors might never have come to light. Laura knew that she owed her daughter more than she could ever express.